Welcome to Brain Wednesday edition. Actually, we had a name for it, didn't we?
Yeah, Brain Freeze.
But today we've got a very special guest with us, Matt Hussey from GenerosityX. Matt is the lead strategist and founder and our sponsor for this half of the season. And we've been so blessed to have him, and I've been blessed to know him. Matt, why don't you tell us a little bit about GenerosityX and what you guys are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's fun to be here. You guys look great, and yeah, it should be a good conversation. I've loved the pod so far, and it'll be interesting to dive into kind of my small view on a lot of what's happening in this changing landscape. But GenerosityX is a marketing agency, a growth agency that works exclusively with charities, focusing on their fundraising. We're very, very growth oriented. How we define our ICP, or ideal customer profile, if you've ever heard that term, is not necessarily by size or type of organization. If it's a food bank versus a wildlife humane shelter, we define it actually primarily by growth targets and a willingness to invest in particularly acquisition. So if you're an organization wanting to grow your donor pool and build your annual program much bigger than it is today over the short and the long term, that's kind of where we work well with charities and really what we're focused on. So the ways we do that is largely through marketing campaigns to the masses. So whether that's email marketing, building automations, we do a lot of digital media buys. Direct mail is a big part of the charitable world for those listening not in annual giving or fundraising, as well as a lot of website and CRO. And part of that is, especially on the digital side, is we rely a lot on technology, and technology is changing and adapting. And if you want to grow, technology is becoming more and more an important variable in it. So that's where I find this stuff, and kind of where we felt like we were good sponsors for the show is, hey, AI, this is the biggest, since the Industrial Revolution, this is the biggest thing to change in the technological landscape. And it's affecting every corner, and marketing is certainly not abstained from it. So yeah, it should be a fun convo. That's a little bit about us.
For sure. I mean, I think, and people at home will recognize, like, many of the things we're going to be discussing today are applicable broadly across both, like, not just nonprofits and charities, but like anyone who's marketing is going to learn from stuff that we talk about today. So thanks, Matt.
100%. Yeah, it'll be fun.
The nonprofit world has tended to lag a little bit behind the for-profit world in technology. But late last year, Blackbaud announced the partnership with Anthropic, which was really exciting. More and more fundraising tools are starting to incorporate AI. We've seen tools like Avid coming out. And even though there's been slightly slower adoption within the nonprofits, our users and our donors, they're using it. They're using it regularly as an everyday part of their lives.
Yeah.
So even if we're not, if we're being a little bit slower in rolling it out, we have to acknowledge that the other side of the equation is actively using it.
For sure. And we should also be made aware, or make people aware, that many of the platforms are also using the tools. Like, anywhere you might reach or acquire new users, those platforms are making AI tools available to marketers to be able to use them. So becoming good at that is probably a really important thing. Right.
So, like, Matt, how do you find the wider adoption of AI chat is affecting how people are finding charities?
It's a great question. I think the two things that stand out to me is, one area where I would say the charitable sector was less lagging behind was with some of the predictive machine learning that, there's some platforms in the nonprofit space like a Dataro, and that has been around for a long time. By comparison, it's more like the massive generative AI, with OpenAI, when it was, December or sometime in late 2022 that it came to market. I forget. But I find it very interesting, the fact that charities are very unique, where they get a lot of information just because, and mainly to do with tax receipts. So if you want a tax receipt, a charity has to ask for an address on their online donation form. So versus if I walk into the store and buy, a new shirt from Winners, and they kind of go, hey, what's your postal code? I go, no, thanks. We're going to end that conversation right now, and you're not going to get my email, and it's fine, but, nothing against you, but I'd rather not. give up more information than I need, versus charities just get a ton of information just because. And I think where that's really interesting is, one, a big part where we've been relying more and more on different platforms is obviously without any personal identifiable information, but how do you synthesize data? And I think that's kind of one area. Even also how platforms are using it. That's a big thing about, because of an Avid, is they synthesize a lot of data to help provide some of the key findings. We use Microsoft Clarity, and if you've heard of a Hotjar, if you've heard of analytics, Microsoft Clarity is a web analytic platform kind of like those. The one thing is it includes heat maps for free. So if you want heat maps on your site, but you don't really want to pay a fat fee to Hotjar, you can use that. It's kind of a small side tip. And now they're using AI to synthesize session recordings. Oh, you had a lot of dead clicks here. You had a lot of things happen here.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that you can just quickly find key summaries and, obviously you can write copy. There's the generative elements that way, but also, hey, I have just a ton of information I have to go through. One thing I saw online was somebody used it to identify, it was a guess, but hey, put in boy or girl, like kind of guess gender based off first name. If you went row by row off even 1,000 donors, right? That's a few hours. You maybe just, put the music on, pay attention, but it's kind of a tedious task for a human versus, hey, just go through row by row, Claude, and spit out a new Excel file. I don't even want you to update the one. I actually want the new one in the ideal format I need it. Just the fact that is now a part of how we can do work, and I find very interesting. So I think that's one area. Session recordings, individually, they can be interesting to look at, but actually, how do you get some decent insight from it? I think just the fact that more analytic tools are building that in, I think that's kind of where it becomes very interesting. It still kind of leaves the human, assuming they're not going beyond that, to kind of ask more questions and kind of take the information a little bit further. So it still has a bit of a human operator versus recommending from this, update your landing page in this way. But I think that's just a matter of time before those platforms have that functionality built directly in, and some of those agents already built into a Microsoft Clarity. What do you think
the time gain has been? Like the difference between doing it before in the old processes and doing it now with AI to get to those insights?
You know what? Honestly, who can say that? But it's got to be, I imagine, like for me, I'll speak from my point of view. I imagine I can do 3 times the amount of work than I could, and I have this,
which is crazy.
GenerosityX. The one thing I didn't mention is we were founded in April 2023. So I was just gifted. Some people started, an agency during COVID where a lot of people were going to digital marketing, all this sort of stuff. And
right.
Obviously the economy was kind of weird post-COVID. Like, I wouldn't say it was bad or what, but it was just kind of weird what's going on with tariffs and so on and so forth within the Canadian context. But just the fact that I started a business on marketing in during this eruption of AI, and just from a competitive landscape point of view, the fact that we got to build this company of okay, instead of a creative director, what if our hire in 2026 is a head of generative AI? Just the fact that I lucked out where we get to think about building a company, knowing everybody can put on a Superman suit, or superhero suit, I should maybe say. It's kind of wild. So for me, if I had to guess, probably 300% in efficiency. And of course, I'm just then deploying that time in different ways. So
absolutely
more from a satisfaction, work-life kind of joy point of view. I think that's where it's also interesting is hopefully, for me, just knowing I like the more strategic elements of marketing, the fact that I can just spend more time doing that is great. But I don't know. It's hard to say. I think a lot of people are maybe still missing out on the fact that, and that's kind of the tricky thing is I know, Dave, you've spoken to this quite a bit. How do we enable teams to know where and how to use AI has been probably a huge part of our training and development is, okay, instead of reading a training manual, how do you make a notebook LM? So somebody can kind of listen to this podcast style. Yeah. I would say maybe 300% if I had to guess, but That's kind of the thing is it's just become such a reality, at least for us, that it's really just kind of become a little bit more of the norm and part of the day to day.
Yeah, and it's interesting that this big key difference between nonprofit and for-profit is that the for-profit world is worried about rolling out tools because it means less people available to do the work. In the nonprofits, we're already working on hairline margins.
Yeah, well said.
And so it doesn't mean that we're going to remove people. It means that those people that we are already are constrained with such a small team, we're able to do more with what we have. So it's a kind of a complete opposite trajectory. And we kind of have a bit of a responsibility in the nonprofit world to do that, to maximize our output and maximize our time.
Because
and maximize the resources.
It translates into stewarding a donor's dollars.
Yeah, and it turns into like somebody else that was fed, or a dog that was saved, or the trees that were planted.
Exactly.
Or that's what it turns into in the end. So while it's great to save time and improve margins and all those things, it does trickle on downstream in the work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, and it's funny how you guys described it. It's such a mindset thing where, you think of like the big corporations, like there might be a lot of news or views on like, oh, don't cut jobs because of, AI. And it's interesting in the nonprofit space where it's like, yeah, we actually used more AI so we didn't have to hire a role. And because there is a little bit more emphasis on that overhead and how dollars are used, and I think that's why also people do get burnt out. It's like, well, we can't hire you help because like our ratio has to stay at 20% or less spent on administration and fundraising. So that's a really interesting element of it, just because right now AI, I think, has a little bit of the villain elements, particularly if you think of like a jobs, blue collar, like regardless of what you think politically, just kind of that persona type. But it's very much with corporations in mind, and charities. It's almost, I think, seen as a little bit more of a gift, a blessing. The fact that, well, we can actually use this to kind of bring teams, hopefully, to a place where you don't get burnt out, while also recognizing that budgets are naturally far more constrained because of how we expect and how charities want to operate.
Yeah, and for those at home who aren't aware, that constraint looks generally in a charity like 80% of the dollar that comes in needs to go to the purpose of the organization. 20% needs to go to the ops of accomplishing that purpose. So that's kind of how the dollar splits for charities and nonprofits. So it's like, it's a huge challenge, right? Whereas any other business might be able to say, 50% is going to go to ops, 50% is going to go to whatever. So
charities have to run on an 80% profit margin.
Yeah, exactly.
Literally, whatever we spend, 80% of it has to be pure profit that we can send somewhere else.
Exactly.
So we really have to be efficient in everything we do. Yeah. Yeah, and the more efficient that you are as an agency serving charities, the more work that you're going to be able to get done in helping them in their cause. Now, another topic that we talked about a little bit was kind of how chatbots are affecting how people are finding charities and researching charities and all of that. Like, how do you see things like ads in ChatGPT kind of affecting the funnel? Like, where do you see that fitting in a donor acquisition or cultivation funnel?
So I've spent a lot of time speculating on this. So this is all speculation. Keep that in mind. But it's interesting because I think unless ChatGPT is going to search, but if it's using its kind of pre-existing knowledge, right? So it's not searching the internet, but it's going to give you a more quick response. It's funny how it's going to be a little bit generalized, which, isn't a bad thing. It's synthesized a ton of information. But if I were to ask it, hey, tell me, the best charities in Toronto, like tell me 5 charities that are great in Toronto, it'll probably give you the kind of big, name brand charities like a Young Street Mission or, Toronto General Hospital Foundation and yada, yada. So I think it's interesting because that's kind of related to, I view that similarly, obviously it's a different user experience, but almost similar to like organic search. And obviously part of the chat box is how the AI overview, right? We all see in Google now. And that's kind of an interesting element is if you had good SEO before, or if you kind of had a strong brand presence, and I think you're going to have a huge advantage. And obviously, I think there'll still be, I'm looking for a very specific charity. I think it'll be kind of advantageous as people use chatbots, especially around trust. Like, I think that's kind of one thing is I might go to Google because I'm looking for something in particular. But where all these generative AI tools are very nuanced is it's a little bit more like nuanced and might be more curiosity based. Is like, I'm looking for this website in particular, or a charity that does this, or a tire change, right? Like Google is so tactically oriented versus people are using ChatGPT now as like, I talked about this with my therapist. Can I break it down with you a little bit more? And a little bit of that, not to say it's a therapist, but just, that idea that it's like, I can have that conversation and pull out some of the emotion. And, I want to donate some money towards this, what's happening around this cold weather vortex to help a Toronto charity that helps people who live outside. Like I might have a prompt like that, people experiencing homelessness. And I think that's where it's kind of interesting, where it will kind of go a little bit more nuanced. And I think if you had some of that credibility and trust, like a charity intelligence, even if you don't agree with it, just the fact that those are the signals of trust. And I think that's where just knowing trust is such a theme in philanthropy, it will be advantageous. Okay, if you were well trusted before and you had recognition of that publicly, like, whether charity intelligence or some of these credibility tools, I think that's where it's very, very interesting, more from an organic point of view, how marketing is playing a role. But then, of course, the apps, I think, is where, okay, if you're willing to, it'll be interesting to see how big you can go with the spend. Like Google, if you think of search marketing, there can sometimes be some natural limitations depending on how often a keyword is used, right? So you're bidding on that keyword and you're buying that. If you think of traditional search marketing versus how often is, how often will people bid on keywords in ChatGPT? I don't even know for sure how they're going to manage different elements of that.
Yeah.
If they'll just make it an unlimited cap. And I think that's where it's like, okay, if people are searching for it a little bit, or if you're willing to be very aggressive, where I do think a ChatGPT is going to have a huge advantage for the small or unknown or smaller brand awareness charity, is it will be more of a nuanced conversation and not as keyword driven. And somebody might be going to ChatGPT to kind of help me find it a little bit more. I don't know exactly what I'm looking for next. I just want a water charity that I can really trust, that's under 5 million. That isn't one of the huge ones. I want to support a bit of a smaller, more grassroots cause. And I think there is a bit of an opportunity, less on maybe the organic. I think if you didn't have that before, you just have to kind of maybe get caught up the old fashioned way. And, but I think that's kind of one area in particular, knowing that's where I see it a little bit different from a paid search strategy. As paid search, it's very keyword oriented. So even if you have an ad that appears, I had a lot of intention around why I put that keyword in versus ChatGPT. I'll use it to kind of, hey, I had a tough conversation with an employee. Can you help me break this down? Maybe where I could have been. Like, it's just so much more nuanced. And if it can take that into account well and present me with something that helps that nuance, especially around trust and some of these big themes for charities, I think that's where a small shop, if it's willing to be innovative, go market on ChatGPT and have a decent spend, I think that's where it's very, very interesting to see if that will be what begins to help some of these smaller organizations be a differentiator and get their name out there.
I remember in like the late 2017, 2018, Facebook announced that they'd be using interest-based information from Facebook pages to inform audience acquisition for ads. And you could say, hey, I want to find someone who's interested in paper mills or whatever, or it was. I use that because I'm from a paper mill town.
From a northern Ontario town. He grew up around paper mills, so that's the first thing that came to mind.
Interest-based advertising, and I'm wondering if there's an analogous thing that will happen with ChatGPT where conversations are defined in kind of interest categories, and then ads are presented based on those interests.
Yeah, I think leaning more towards the intent versus the keyword aspect, right? It's you say because you work with clients, but sometimes what you say isn't what you're really going for.
Right.
You're looking for something different, and you're not sure how to get there. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out between the ads versus shopping suggestions. What happens if organically you have these shopping suggestions showing up as products, and you can't have donation products there yet, but maybe they'll end up opening that up. It'll just be interesting to see, like, do I end up bidding against an organic placement of shopping products, and now we're against each other? It's just going to be interesting to see how they kind of play out against each other.
Yeah, and it took a long time for YouTube, for instance, to start deploying links for charities inside of their YouTube video platform, even though it would have been tremendously useful for many charities to use that. And it still feels like it's a brand new product. I think it's interesting that OpenAI is deciding, hey, we have so much content being built and being asked of us inside these windows. How do we monetize further? That does beg the question, how much monetization do they expect from these ads? That's another question for another show. But
yeah.
Well, you know what? I think, sorry, not to dive too much on that, but I do think just knowing directionally where they're going compared to some of these other, and I think where they're unique in the same way like Anthropic is unique, or Claude is just, they kind of are siloed. Like ChatGPT kind of has to build partnerships, like compared to Gemini, they got Google's network, they got Google Work. They just kind of already, they just need to be great, and they have a ton of market opportunity just because they're part of that ecosystem. Versus ChatGPT is like, okay, can we get in with Siri and Apple? Like, can we present enough of a case so they don't do it themselves?
Yeah.
They're just.
Can we get in with Alibaba? Can we get in with?
Honestly,
money.
Obviously their speculative valuation, I don't even know what it was, but like, they're trying to go, okay. So in the same way, like Facebook has just monetized Facebook ads like more and more and more. I do think ChatGPT, like that will be the route. And it's almost like, okay, maybe that's more of the play for them compared to the like a $20 membership, or like, it's $100 for a membership per month, or so I think that will be pretty interesting. The one last thing I'll say about this is also just the fact that like where I do think I see it more like a search or like a discovery versus a Facebook ad will interrupt you. Oh, you might be interested in cats and dogs, but you weren't looking for my charity per se when you saw this ad. So it's a little bit more of an interrupter versus I think ChatGPT is like, well, we're going to make this super relevant in the same way if you search puppy charity, you'll get at least a relevant result. This in theory would be more relevant. But I think that's where it's kind of interesting is trust in some of the conversations is where I think it'll have more of an upside potentially compared to like a paper search strategy. And in the same way, a lot of people don't look up donate to charity. I think that's where it's like, okay, can you as we learn more about how you can run ads on ChatGPT, how will that even work? Will it be entirely AI also from the marketer's experience of like, yeah, you just tell us who you are and you won't have any influence of how these ads show because we're going to do that better than you. Yeah. I imagine that's probably how it's going to work versus can you give it a prompt on the back end? I would really love this ad to show if they're looking up charities you can trust, reference these pages. I don't know, but I think that'll be the interesting thing is, okay, how do you use it on the back end from the marketer's point of view? Because on Facebook, it's like, well, I do want people interested in this. And the human might have some of the nuance of like, well, we don't talk about the fact that we have horses a lot, but we know we save horses as a humane society. It's just more recognized from puppies and dogs, but I want to find people who like horses too. That might not be something like an AI bot naturally can find unless it's obvious to them across the internet's ecosystem. Right. So
yeah, right on. Well, partnerships are very important. So how can people get in touch with you if they want to?
Definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn. I will make sure either in the show notes or you can go to LinkedIn and look up Matt Hussey. There's a famous dating coach who's also very well known. You're going to look for the guy who has GenerosityX as the business listed, or you can visit generosityx.com and contact us. We'd love to connect on LinkedIn. And of course, if you're kind of wondering how can we be using technology and taking things to the next level within our marketing fundraising program, it'd be great to connect. So I just wanted to say thanks to you guys again for having me. That was a pretty fun conversation, and it's a little speculative, but it'll be interesting to see by year end 2026, I guess the end of this year, how much money are charities making from ChatGPT compared to a Google or compared to Facebook? I guess time will tell, but it's certainly something we're planning for this year. So we'll see how it goes.
Amazing. Thanks so much for your partnership and for being on today. If you've watched to this point, please make sure you hit like, hit subscribe, and share this with your nonprofit circle.
Totally.
And we'll see you again in 2 weeks when everything has changed all over again.
Thanks, Matt. See ya.
Thanks, guys. See ya.